We've heard for years about the psychological wounds of war. Soldiers who return from the battlefield broken and in despair. But the quiet battle being fought by first responders here at home can be just as traumatizing. Police, firefighters, and paramedics fighting their demons alone and in secret. Tonight, Sean Mallon reports on the devastating cost of running into danger and taking it home with you.
Everybody wants to know, so everybody asks, what's the worst thing you've seen?
I never realized how difficult it would be. People dying in your arms, people burnt alive.
Decapitations, amputations.
They are there for us in times of crisis. Firefighters, paramedics, police. But in serving their communities, they are often wounded by horrible memories.
Those sounds and sights never leave you. There comes a point when we fracture.
Few people in Canada know more about how post-traumatic stress disorder affects first responders than Jeff Morley. He retired from the RCMP in June of 2013. Now, he's a psychologist.
When we're attacked, assaulted, punched, kicked, shot at, otherwise traumatized, we're going to have predictable responses to that. So PTSD is when those responses get severe, when they get stuck, when they're prolonged, and they start to negatively impact people's lives.
My name is Sergeant Jack Stein. I'm a member of the RCMP. I've been dealing with my post-traumatic stress disorder for the past 13 years. I was involved in responding to a domestic disturbance up north. The suspect threw gasoline at myself and my partner. He set us on fire along with the house. I was trapped in that burning house. I still can't remember how I ever got to the door. I kept pulling at the handle. It wouldn't open. My partner, Denise, was behind me and kept saying, "Open the door, Jack, open the door." I said, "I'm trying, I can't. And we were both on fire and could hardly breathe because of the smoke inhalation. And the last thought that came through my mind, I thought, this is it. I'm never going to see my son again. I don't know what happened. Denise, my partner, started breaking the window with the firearm. And apparently that relieved the pressure, so I was able to open the door. My face was burning and I could hardly breathe. And then I see the suspect approaching me, and it was like watching a zombie. It was all black, charred. There's a trail of blood behind him, and his hands to the side, and he was still walking. When I was going through this, I was having the classic symptoms of PTSD, which I didn't know what it was at the time. Getting angry at my wife or my kids for no reason at all, having flashbacks, having nightmares, not being able to sleep. And because of that, I started self-medicating with alcohol just to get 4 or 5 hours sleep, And it comes a point that you don't really care what happens to you. And after 2 years of putting up with this, My wife, who is an angel, she's my savior, she told me, she said, "Jag, there's something wrong with you. You either go get some help or we're done."
My name is Rob Eichelson, and I'm an advanced care paramedic, and I've been battling PTSD and depression for almost a decade. It was Christmas time, 2005, and I'll never forget the day. I was told to respond to the center of the city for a mass shooting with unknown patients. And I remember turning onto the street and seeing thousands of people, at least it looked like thousands of people, stop, and it was silent. First officer tells me this might be people on a roof shooting. We don't know. Just keep your head down. And I'll just never forget those words. It might be sharpshooters, keep your heads down. And there was people shot here, and then I kept walking up the street, and there were more people, and I walked over, and there was more people. And I remember hearing from the radio that they were getting reports of more shootings, and it's just like craziness.
It was Boxing Day at one of Toronto's busiest malls, the Eaton Centre. Murdered was an innocent bystander, 15-year-old Jane Kriba, and 6 others were injured in the gunfire.
That was one of the scariest days of my life.
The next day, Rob was on the front page of the newspaper. He was doing his best to forget what had happened, but his colleagues wouldn't let him.
They said, Bloodbath Rob, because that was the headline in the paper. And everybody wanted to know all day. Everybody's asking me, tell me about the call. What was it like? What did you see? And I had to relive it and tell them constantly. But inside, I was falling apart. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get rid of these sounds, these smells. So I started drinking. And it got to the point in early January that I tucked my son in and I said goodbye. And I was gonna end my life.
Rob told a friend about his plan to commit suicide, who in turn called the police. He was hospitalized and went through months of psychiatric treatment. In all that time, he says he never received any support from his employer.
We had a staff shrink or psychologist and never received a phone call. Never had a debriefing. Even when I was in hospital and then after, still nothing, and they knew about it. When I went off on comp after, nothing. To this day, nothing.
Rob eventually went back to work, but a few years later, he witnessed another horrific shooting. It triggered his PTSD again, and again, he says, there was no help.
That's the reaction. Silence. I'm almost treated like I'm broken. It's a very lonely place. We're taught to be tough, Be tough, suck it up, don't say anything. And so we suffer in silence. And it's destroyed my family's life. And it's destroyed lives of, I don't even know how many of my colleagues.
My name's Jeff Balch. I'm presently a member of Barrie Fire Emergency Service. My PTSD was from exposure to cumulative trauma. All I wanted to do was basically I was sitting in my garage and drinking. And I just wanted everybody just to leave me alone.
For Jeff, the trauma started 26 years ago when he was in the military, a bomb disposal expert.
We were training officer cadets, and during that time there was a premature explosion, and it was quite violent, the transections, the amputations.
Jeff became a firefighter after leaving the armed forces. Although he loved his job, civilian life as a first responder piled on new, troubling experiences.
The flashbacks, the nightmares from both military and experiences in fire trauma were very intense.
And then one day, his wife found him in the garage, ready to kill himself.
I was crying, and she came out, and she heard me, and she didn't know what was going on, and I couldn't stop crying. And that's when I informed her that I had thoughts of suicide.
Unlike many first responders, Jeff received strong support from his employer. He says his biggest problem was getting help from the people who handle workplace insurance for the province of Ontario.
I filled in the paperwork, and I've heard nothing. I heard absolutely nothing for months and months. What they wanted me to do was to list on paper the list of traumas that bothered me the most. And I also had to provide witnesses and phone numbers to so they could phone them and verify that I wasn't making these stories up.
PTSD is a recognized mental disorder, but many first responders have to fight to get their claims covered. Dr. Jeff Morley says it means more suffering.
When a first responder, comes forward, overcomes their own stigma and fear to say help, I think we need to presume that it's legit.
The cost of not getting the treatment has become painfully clear. At least 30 first responders have committed suicide in the last 9 months.
I've lost 3 of my friends within the RCMP in the past 10 years. And every person we lose, it takes a little bit of us with them,
Next, failing those who serve and protect.
What does that tell you about the way the RCMP deals with PTSD?
Inept. Absolutely inept.
There is perhaps nothing more symbolic of Canada than the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
I am, and I always will be proud of being a Mountie. That's part of me. It'll never be any different.
Sergeant Jag Sohan has been part of the proud tradition of the RCMP for more than 20 years. When an officer is wounded or killed in the line of duty, the tributes are heartfelt, the support profound. But if a member suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, the reaction is very different.
You feel so isolated, You're not part of the group at work. People seldom call you. My officer commanding, despite having told him that I had PTSD, he never understood it. It was very demoralizing. I used to say to myself, what don't they understand?
Mental illness is definitely something that was and that, is still to this day an issue in the organization.
Assistant Commissioner Gilles Moreau admits the RCMP needs to do much more to help members suffering with PTSD. He points to a new mental health strategy unveiled this year as proof that that's happening.
The key thing is to talk about mental health, mental illness. That's the biggest piece of the strategy. is to talk about it, and not just from the bottom up, but the top down.
Psychologist Jeff Morley is a former RCMP officer and says the stigma of PTSD is still a problem at the highest levels.
I think it's hard to change the culture when the commissioner of the RCMP mocks people with PTSD.
Morley's talking about a speech the RCMP commissioner gave to members in Edmonton in 2013.
I want people to hear it from me that if you get hurt on the job, and that includes, we're going to look after you. But there's an onus on you, though, to come back to work. Because that's the objective. The objective is not get a regimental number and then cha-ching, cha-ching, we're looking after you for the rest of your life into your grave. No.
What kind of message does that send?
It was not a good message, and you apologize for that.
But isn't it reflective of the kind of cultural barriers that still exist within the RCMP?
Yes, absolutely. And we need to change that because it's not acceptable.
His inference that members with PTSD are just taking advantage of the system, I think also speaks to his disbelief in many of the people that have PTSD.
Morley says there are few hard numbers on how many first responders suffer from PTSD, but it's likely in the thousands, and it can be deadly.
Are our programs working? Are they effective? They need to be designing and offering and testing programs for early intervention, for treatment, so that we can develop best practices, and I see none of that in their current strategy.
Right now, what we need to address in this organization is a stigma that's attached to mental health.
Shouldn't you be taking a serious look at whether what you're doing is working right from the beginning?
We could, yes. Are we doing that right now? No. We are a policing organization, and we have to focus our resources towards that.
Morley suspects the RCMP doesn't want to focus those resources on finding out the rates of PTSD because they're afraid of what they might find out.
I don't think they want to know, and I don't think government wants to know. Because if they did a really thorough research project and they got to the bottom of this, they might be surprised at what the rates are, and that's going to demand action, which is going to have dollars attached to it.
Moreau insists the help is there for those who need it. But the case of Corporal Ron Francis has raised troubling questions. The veteran New Brunswick Mountie was in tears in November of 2013 as he returned the iconic red serge he'd worn proudly for 20 years.
I have not one flaw on my service record.
Francis was the RCMP's highest profile victim of PTSD. He smoked medical marijuana to treat it, smoked it while in uniform, a uniform that he was then ordered to hand in. In October, he was found dead, suicide suspected.
Here's a guy who had apparently diagnosed PTSD and had his uniform taken away. Surely that's not a good tactic.
You know, we had to do certain things, and we did them. The support was there, the help was there,
but he's gone.
Yes, he is, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that he is.
That hasn't helped your cause very much, has it?
It does not. However, I can tell you that we did everything that we could.
What does that tell you about the way the RCMP deals with PTSD?
Inept. Absolutely inept.
Romeo Dallaire has become the face of PTSD in the Canadian military. It began when he was the commander of UN peacekeepers during Rwanda's genocide, a witness to one of the darkest moments of the 20th century. It nearly destroyed him.
And all that culminated in my own inability to function anymore in any sort of reasonable way. And so I just exploded with it.
After the suicide of Corporal Francis, Assistant Commissioner Roger Brown had this to say.
The RCMP had been working with Ron to do everything we could to get him the support he had asked for, and needed.
Did their actions disagree with those words?
I mean, how the hell do you respond to that? People expect you to do everything you can. What they want to hear is, why didn't it work? So they're covering their ass by trying to, say we did everything we could and we're very sorry. That ain't good enough.
Recently, as a member of Canada's Senate, Dallaire has been instrumental in reforming how the Army deals with post-traumatic stress disorder. But he says the RCMP was resistant to change.
The RCMP never really got on board, yet they have access to the same thing the soldiers do through Veterans Affairs. It is fundamental that the chain of command realize that its philosophy in this area is old, erroneous, ineffective, and even dangerous for its own people.
That's his evaluation. Since 2006, we've had 17 serving members committing suicide, and some 15, I believe, retired members that we know of that committed suicide. Now, is it all linked to PTSD? We don't have those stats. We don't have that analysis done.
While the Mounties look for answers, first responders like RCMP Sergeant Jag Sowen, firefighter Jeff Balch, and paramedic Rob Eichelson want two things: help for the first responders who are suffering, and respect for the ones who didn't make it.
We should honor them the same as we honor the members who die or are killed.
If you don't get the help, you're not going to survive. That's the bottom line.
These are the people there to protect you, and they won't be there to protect you. We need help.
We'd love for you to continue this discussion with us online. We'll be hosting a live blog this Monday, February 2nd from 2 to 4 Eastern. Just log on to global16by9.com. We'll be right back.